There is something about New York City in the 1980s that people who lived through it cannot forget. The grit, the creativity, the danger, the energy that pulsed through every street. If someone was there, they know exactly what made that decade so unforgettable. This was a time when New York was broken and brilliant at the same time. Crime was epidemic, but art was exploding. Wall Street was booming while neighborhoods crumbled. Times Square was dangerous, not a tourist attraction. The subway was a rolling nightmare covered in graffiti. This decade gave us hip-hop's golden age, the crack epidemic, Ed Koch as mayor, and a city that felt like it could either kill you or make you a star, sometimes on the same block. The safe, sanitized New York of today did not exist. Living in New York City meant accepting chaos as the price of being at the center of everything. Let's walk through what daily life actually felt like during that raw, electric decade. Some of this might bring back memories. Some of it might explain why people who survived New York in the 1980s wear it like a badge of honor. Let's step into that world. Living in New York City in the 1980s meant living with crime in a way that is hard to imagine today. The murder rate peaked in 1990. The entire decade was violent. There were over 1,800 murders per year. Armed robberies, muggings, and assaults were routine. People developed strategies to survive. Walk quickly, look confident, do not make eye contact, carry mugger money, a few dollars in your pocket to hand over without argument. The real money stayed hidden. Women carried their purses tight against their bodies. Men kept wallets in front pockets. Everyone knew someone who had been mugged. Many people had been mugged multiple times. It was just part of living there. The subway was particularly dangerous. Cars were covered in graffiti inside and out. Lights flickered. Homeless people slept across entire rows of seats. Drug dealers worked openly. The guardian angels, citizen patrol groups wearing red berets, rode the trains trying to provide some sense of security. Getting on a subway car meant assessing the situation instantly. Which car had fewer people who looked threatening, where to stand, how to position yourself. Late-night subway rides required serious courage. Many New Yorkers simply would not take the subway after a certain hour. The alternative was a taxi, which meant competing with dozens of other people trying to flag down the yellow cabs that cruised past. Bernie Goetz became a symbol of the era's fear and tension. In 1984, he shot 4 young men on the subway who he claimed were trying to rob him. Some called him a vigilante hero. Others saw racism and excessive force. The incident revealed how frightened New Yorkers were and how racial tensions simmered constantly. Apartments in New York in the 1980s were different from today. Rent stabilization and rent control kept many apartments affordable, though landlords fought these protections constantly. A one-bedroom in Manhattan might rent for $500 or $600 a month in the early 1980s. By the decade's end, those same apartments were $800 or $1,000. Still affordable compared to today, but rising fast. Buildings were often poorly maintained. Landlords had little incentive to invest in rent-controlled properties. Heat was unreliable in winter. Hot water came and went. Cockroaches were everywhere, even in the nicest apartments. New Yorkers developed elaborate strategies to combat them. Boric acid along baseboards, traps under sinks. The battle never ended. Neighborhoods had distinct characters, much more than today. The Upper East Side was wealthy and conservative. The Upper West Side was intellectual and liberal. Greenwich Village remained bohemian, though gentrification was beginning. The East Village was punk rock, drugs, and squatters. Alphabet City, Avenues A, B, C, and D was extremely dangerous. The saying went, Avenue A was acceptable, Avenue B was bearable, Avenue C was crazy, and Avenue D, you were dead. Soho was transforming from industrial lofts into artist spaces and galleries. Tribeca was just beginning that same transformation. Williamsburg was still industrial and working class. Nobody was moving to Brooklyn by choice yet. The Bronx and Harlem were devastated by disinvestment. Buildings burned regularly. Landlords sometimes torched their own properties for insurance money. Entire blocks stood abandoned. Wall Street was booming in the 1980s. Deregulation unleashed finance. Young traders were making fortunes. The culture was cocaine. Suits with wide pinstripes, suspenders, and aggressive masculinity. Michael Douglas in Wall Street captured something real about the era. Greed was good. The money flowing through Lower Manhattan was staggering. Traders worked insane hours, then partied harder. Expensive restaurants filled with people spending freely. Clubs catered to the finance crowd. The contrast between Wall Street wealth and the poverty visible on almost every street was extreme. On the same island, people were making millions while others slept in cardboard boxes. Before we continue with the music and culture that exploded out of the city during this era, if you are enjoying this look back at how people really lived and want to explore more decades and places, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about how Americans built the life we know today. The music coming out of New York in the 1980s was revolutionary. Hip-hop was born in the Bronx in the 1970s, but the 1980s was when it conquered the city and then the world. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five released The Message in 1982. The song's depiction of inner-city struggle was unlike anything in popular music. Run DMC brought hip-hop to mainstream audiences. LL Cool J, Public Enemy, and the Beastie Boys all emerged from New York. Hip-hop was not just music, it was graffiti, breakdancing, fashion, and attitude. The culture was born from poverty and neglect, from kids in the outer boroughs who created something from nothing. Punk rock was centered downtown. CBGB's in the Bowery was the legendary club where the Ramones, Talking Heads, and Blondie had played in the 1970s. In the 1980s, hardcore punk exploded. Bands like Bad Brains and Agnostic Front played fast, aggressive music. The scene was small, intense, and violent. Shows ended in fights. The club itself was disgusting, smelling of beer and urine, but it was sacred ground. New wave and no wave scenes thrived in downtown clubs. The Mud Club, Danceteria, and the Pyramid Club were where artists, musicians, and freaks gathered. These clubs were dark, dangerous, and exhilarating. Art and music blurred together. People like Jean-Michel Basquiat moved between galleries and clubs, between painting and making music. Times Square in the 1980s was not a family destination. It was porn theaters, peep shows, drug dealers, and prostitution. The neon signs advertised vice. Walking through Times Square meant dodging hustlers and watching transactions happen openly. It was dangerous and seedy. The city had been trying to clean it up for years, but Times Square remained a symbol of New York's decay. Tourists avoided it. Most New Yorkers avoided it unless they had specific business there. The transformation into the corporate, sanitized Times Square of today was still years away. Television and movies depicted New York's grit throughout the 1980s. Hill Street Blues, though set in an unnamed city, captured the urban decay. Movies like Taxi Driver and The Warriors showed a New York that was falling apart. The city became a character representing urban danger. The crack epidemic devastated communities starting in the mid-1980s. Crack cocaine was cheap and intensely addictive. It spread through poor neighborhoods with terrifying speed. The violence that came with the crack trade made already dangerous neighborhoods much worse. Entire communities were traumatized. The policy response was punitive rather than therapeutic, and it led to mass incarceration that would destroy families for generations. The AIDS crisis hit New York harder than almost anywhere. The disease, little understood at first, killed thousands. The gay community centered in Greenwich Village was decimated. Friends disappeared, and memorial services became routine. The government response was slow and inadequate. Activists with a CTUP fought for attention, for funding, and for their lives. The combination of crack and AIDS in the 1980s left scars on the city that would take decades to heal. Food in New York in the 1980s was becoming more diverse. Immigrant communities brought cuisines from everywhere. Chinatown offered authentic Chinese food. Little Italy still had old-school red sauce joints, though the neighborhood was shrinking as Chinatown expanded. Korean restaurants opened in Midtown. Dominican food was everywhere in Washington Heights. The deli was a New York institution. Every neighborhood had delis where you could get a sandwich, a coffee, cigarettes, and lottery tickets. The people behind the counter knew the regulars. Ordering was efficient and fast. Bagels were a New York staple. Getting a fresh bagel with schmear and lox from a real New York bagel shop was a small daily pleasure. Pizza by the slice was everywhere, cheap and fast. The dollar slice did not exist yet, but pizza was affordable working-class food. Fashion in New York in the 1980s was bold. Downtown artists wore all black. Wall Street wore power suits with shoulder pads. Hip-hop fashion meant Adidas sneakers, gold chains, and Kangol hats. Punk was leather, spikes in, and mohawks. The East Village was thrift store vintage mixed with do-it-yourself style. People expressed identity through clothing in aggressive ways. Looking tough was protective. Looking artistic was a statement. Looking wealthy was a flex. What defined New York City in the 1980s was tension. Tension between rich and poor, between the finance boom and the crack epidemic, between the art exploding out of the city and the violence on the streets, between the New York that was dying and the New York that was being born. The city was bankrupt at the start of the decade. By the end, real estate values were rising and gentrification was beginning. The changes that would transform New York into a safer, cleaner, more expensive city were starting, but throughout the 1980s, New York remained dangerous, dirty, and thrilling. For those who lived through it, surviving 1980s New York City meant something. It meant navigating danger, embracing chaos, and being part of something raw and real. The city was broken, but it was alive in ways the safer New York of today cannot replicate. For those with memories of this gritty, unforgettable era, there is always more history to explore.